All right, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey, George, thanks for having me on your show. Pretty cool. You've been doing this for over a year. I've been doing shows now for almost 2.5 years myself. Ignacio Esteban here. Esteban. If you speak Spanish, it's Ignacio Esteban. If you don't, Esteban is fine. Retired ATF agent, 26 years, 21 ATF, five with U.S. Customs out of Miami, part of the contraband enforcement team. And during the 90s, made some of the biggest seizures in the country coming in, which is pretty impressive. I almost called, you see the poster behind me, that's the cover of my book there, because now I'm a prolific writer. I have written close to 80 books on Amazon. I have written for Medium, which is a major publishing company online. I think over 100 million users, very popular. So anybody can write, which is pretty cool. I've done like 40 articles in the last 3 weeks, very popular on there too. But I almost called my book ATF Undercover, The Accidental Agent. Back in the 90s, my background, because I do a lot of politics, and my background was political science and history. I studied a lot there. I was working on my master's degree out of FIU, Florida International University, out of Miami, and I was going to go to law school. And I was accepted to law school, but Miami and Michigan, two different worlds, especially in Lansing. That's the capital, very cold. And I said, well, let me look at some other options. This thing called the internet just really boomed. Windows 95 came out, and I got a computer. And people say, what's this thing with the internet, man? What do you spend your time with this thing that you had to do dial up? You couldn't use your cell phone. You couldn't use your regular landline. You go beep. And people are like, man, I can't use the phone. What are you doing? And all this stuff. Well, I was looking for jobs. People were pushing jobs online big time, USA Jobs. And I got picked up. I put in for U.S. Customs because they're looking for Spanish speakers, which I grew up in Miami. My family is originally from Spain and then came to Cuba. And because of Castro and the Revolution, came over to the United States. I was born in L.A., raised in South Florida, and now I live in Northern Virginia. I had retired, so I was working driving with customs, and because of my background, and 90% of the flights coming in from to Miami, MIA, came from Latin America. So they wanted people who understood the culture, which I grew up there. I had friends from all over Latin America, from from the Caribbean, Central America, South America, where have you. And I got picked up, and so I went from almost going to law school from being in the front line in the war on drugs. So I go into there, and at the time, like I said, they're making some of the biggest seizures in the country. I was part of some seizures where like 800 pounds, 1,000 pounds of cocaine coming in, and at the time, it wasn't the Mexicans, it was the Colombians. The Pablo Escobar, the Medellin, Cali cartels, and they're pumping the drugs via Florida, right? Either through planes. Right, that's the fastest way. The slow boats coming in, but what I wasn't ready for, George, and I'm a young guy then. I was in my early 20s when I got picked up. Was the amount of corruption I would see at the airport? Yeah, I expected the longshoremen to be corrupt. I expected the ramp workers to have corruption, but I wasn't expecting the corruption within the own ranks. And that's one thing that was surprising and shocking, especially when I saw one of my supervisors. He got busted by Internal Affairs with Customs, and then we were part of the Department of Treasury, and he was being escorted around. He was handcuffed, belly chains, and all that through the concourse, and he was caught because he was on the weekends clearing flights, and there was a small airport nearby called Tamiami Airport, and he would be using, he would clear the flight coming in, a small flight coming in with like 300 pounds of cocaine. They would take the cocaine with the locals helping them, Hollandale and Howell Police Department, and take them to a warehouse outside. Unbeknownst to them, they were being recorded in a small airport, and they would be busted and arrested later. That's one thing you need. You need to have a good moral compass. No matter what you do, if you go in law enforcement, if you go into business, what have you, you got to have good standards. You're going to be tested. You're going to see things. And if you don't have that, you may fall in. It's sad to see people give. It's in law enforcement, unfortunately, a lot. And first responders, you see a lot. They give in because of financial stress, a divorce, what have you. It's never worth it. And I said to myself, it's never worth it to shame yourself, shame your family for a little bit of money that you might make to help pay some debts, right? But cost you your freedom and cost you your self-respect. Because that guy, they say, that guy's a criminal. That guy's a drug dealer. He was tainted. And I wrote an article about that years later into one of my books, ATF Undercover, called Tainted Badges, talking about the shame of what they did, embarrassing themselves and doing that. And they become criminals. And you see a lot like that. I do a show now recently with the most notorious corrupt cop in NYPD, Michael Dowd, good cop, bad cop. I just did it with him. He's been interviewed by Matt Cox. I know we mentioned I've been on Matt Cox show. Shout out to Matt. I think 4 or 5 times, and he's been on our show with William Steele. Shout out to William Steele. We do also a weekly show. Like I said, I've done like 300 or 400 podcast show and do my own weekly one for over a year and a half now, maybe 2 years. And he's very popular from the reality TV show Inmate to Roommate. That was very popular on A&E. So we've done that together. We talk everything from true crime, current events, a lot of politics. I do a lot of politics, and I do a lot of writing and stuff like that. So going back to that situation there, even Mike Dowd said, he was involved. You haven't seen that Netflix show, 7-5, unbelievable documentary, unbelievable about the corruption and how he went south. Came from a good family, because I saw the interview with Mike Wallace, 60 Minutes, and his father was embarrassed and shamed of him, what he did. He got 14 years. He cooperated, had testified in the commission, but it's not worth it. It's not worth the extra money you get for the shame you bring to your family, shame you bring to yourself, and what happens to you in your life. You get arrested. You get 14. I can imagine spending my 20s and 30s incarcerated. That's awful, awful, awful. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that when you're seeing this, so who exactly is doing it here? So this is the ATF as well that was involved in it?
No, this was when I was in customs before I became an ATF agent. This is what, because before ATF, ATF also at that time was Department of Treasury in the 90s. And there and the borders, people understand, you don't need probable cause to make arrests. It is what you have is, well, when you say you don't need probable cause to searches, you have border authority to search. So anybody coming in from internationally coming in, either the cargo or the person is subject to search. So everybody's subject to search. You're coming from South America. And of course, we get really good at it. The high risk flights are coming in from, let's say, Colombia, from Medellin or Cali. And of course, we would get a lot of people who would swallow a lot of cocaine and heroin and like condoms, right? And they'll be called swallows. And it's amazing how much you can fit in there, and very sad. It would have about 3 or 4 pounds of cocaine or heroin inside their stomach, in their gut area. And we wouldn't catch all of them. Sometimes there'll be flights full of it. I'll be honest with George, maybe we would get maybe 10, 15% of them. A lot of them would get away. So that was probably a very quick way for the cartels to do business, get the product in. Another one with the planes. Like I said, it wasn't uncommon for us to catch lots of drugs in the fish, in the flowers, 747 full of drugs coming in. And of course, when you have the corruption with the ramp workers on top of that, that makes it easier for them to, in 6-7 hours, fly the stuff in, get it into the connection, and get it out. I'm supposed to get it on a boat or something coming in. So that's why you see in Miami, like I said, in the 80s and 90s was the way to do it. It would change with the collapse of the Colombian cartels, and then the Mexican cartels stepped up, and they felt getting it through the border, land border, the Southwest was the better way of doing it, especially with all the underground tunnels in there, with the mass amount of cargo coming through. That's the way they pushed a lot of the drugs coming in now, is through the land border in through Mexico. It's changed. The game has changed, but still interesting. So I wanted to do more proactive cases, not just limit myself to the airport. So I put in for ATF, Secret Service, FBI, DEA, and ATF picked me up pretty quick. So in 2000, I got picked up, and the good thing is, at least they didn't send me to the Southwest border or some place I didn't want to go to. I stayed in Florida. I wasn't in Miami, but I went to Tampa, where I had studied before in college. So I'm familiar with the area, and I started working with ATF in Tampa from 2000 there to 2012. And what's ATF? Well, ATF is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And we do a lot. I always kid around. I used to say ATF has now a small A for alcohol, small T for tobacco, huge F for firearms trafficking cases, and a medium E for explosives. Most of our work has to do with firearms and guns. There's other stuff we do, but a lot of it, bread and butter, has to do with guns and trafficking, dealing with repeat violent offenders, gang members, international firearms traffickers. You're dealing with home invaders. You're dealing with guys doing murder for hires. Those are what ATF agents do. Those are the cases. We don't do a lot of white collar crime. We do a lot of blue collar. We do a lot of cases where we do the worst of the worst, dealing with people who are the worst criminals and putting them away for a long time.
So I interviewed somebody that you knew, Pete Forcelli, and first of all, great guy. I really like doing the interview with him. But I was gonna say that when you're talking about corruption, customs, and all the stuff that you're seeing, before I get more into the ATF part, because I was gonna ask about Pete, but or something that Pete brought up, but I'm gonna ask first about all the corruption that was going on in customs, because that's kind of a fascinating topic. So
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the swallowers, right? Like the swallowers,
Yeah.
are they? How do you get? So this is something I've never understood. How do you catch somebody when it's in their body? Because that seems to me like kind of the perfect way to smuggle drugs. Like, not that I would, but if I were a drug dealer, hypothetically, I would use that technique. Like, because that's much easier and much harder to prove than. So I just don't see a way that you would get caught. So how do you catch somebody that's a swallower?
Yeah. It's a lot of different factors that go into it, especially you have intelligence, the region. Let's the easy ones were, let's say you have somebody who's not from Colombia. But the tough ones are people from that area who are here. But if they're like people who unfortunately who are, let's just say, peasants who don't have a lot of resources, they don't look the part. There's no reason them to be here, right? They don't have any money really. They're struggling. You can tell, and then you get really good at picking it up when they're when you swallow all those condoms, right? Those pellets, right? That's full of cocaine. You have a latex breath. You're swallowing a lot of times with these sports drinks to help push it down. So you pick all that up on their breath. You pick up their nervous behavior, right? A lot of people really are not really good at this. They start shaking, crying, and what they're doing. And unfortunately, a lot of people, some of them also die in the plane. When they start leaking, they also die in the plane. It's very dangerous to be doing that kind of work. But like I said, you're right. We have to take them then. If they don't confess, we had a system set up where we had the local hospital there, Jackson Memorial Hospital, where we suspect, let's say everything matches up. They're a suspicious travel agency. They come in from a high risk area. They have no means to be here. They check up only for a few days. They're staying at a really cheesy hotel that's known to be doing this, right? They check off all the boxes, but they won't break. Then we have to take them to the hospital and have to get x-rayed. And then they can see the pellets inside them when they x-ray them. And then when they do that, then we have to take them in, we arrest them, we give them laxatives, and we say a process to go there. Not a lot of people can't pass these pellets very quickly. It takes them a while. So it's a process. Sometimes if you do make it and you can't pass out fast enough, these groups are not going to waste time with you. They'll just shoot you, gut you, and take it and discard your body. Because to me, you're just nothing that they're using to get their product in there. They're ruthless and vicious, and it's awful, awful business, awful business. These guys, nothing glamorous about it at all. They're just awful people, taking advantage of people and making other people addicts to ruin their lives. It's awful.
So going from that subject of, corruption and like drug smuggling. So I've had, Special Agent Jim DiOrio. He's like the super famous former FBI agent. And him and I did an interview with him, and he's a former head of the New Jersey FBI. We talked a lot about corruption. And when he's talking about corruption that happens like in the FBI, he talks about it usually from the perspective of, like, I'll give you an example. If he was to go try to, so there was a guy, for example, he spoke about where he investigated him, and this guy was committing the most insane form of like insurance fraud in terms of like how obvious it was. Like, it didn't take a genius to figure out this guy was doing it. Like they had video recordings of him doing it. Like they knew it. They go to raid his house, and his wife was the U.S. attorney for,
Interesting.
or was the U.S. attorney for the state of New Jersey, or I think. And next thing you know, they get a call from her office saying the search is off. Like not her, but from a person in her office, which is the federal prosecutor's office. So
that's interesting.
So when he talks about corruption, it's usually more from a higher level coming down. And I've spoken to other cops, and they kind of say the same thing, where when it comes to that type of corruption, like they investigate a politician or somebody in a position of power, it usually comes from, somebody that's a friend of theirs or some affiliation, and it trickles down basically.
Yeah, well, there's all different kinds of corruption. You're right, George. It comes in many different ways. There's political corruption, there's corruption within the office, and then there's corruption stuff you see on the street, right?
Yeah.
guys who are taking advantage of situations and stealing and stuff like that. That's why I recommend watching that with Michael Dowd and the 7-5 precinct, and then being interviewed by him and just seeing on the street level how they did it, and lying to your fellow officers, or maybe they're looking the other way too. There's that type of corruption too, where guys know what's going on, but they look the other way, right? That's also a problem there. That's why I think it's important to have a good moral compass. That way you don't put yourself in those situations where you're not going to be compromised. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And you said, listen, this is not going to happen, and move on. So I end up getting, like I said, picked up by ATF, and I'm working in a lot of different cases, and working undercover. It's something for everybody. And the group I was in was working a lot of undercover work. So I get to learn from different styles how they do undercover work. And I hook up with a guy. His name is Carlos, and he ends up being my mentor. He does a lot of undercover work, and he was known as the bullet catcher, the Puerto Rican bullet catcher. And I'll tell you a quick story what happened to him, which I always found fascinating. I even saw the gun that he had in a frame, in a plaque. It was a SIG 9mm, and he was shot by a guy with a SIG 9mm, and which is 6-hour, by the way. If you don't know what a SIG is, 6-hour, and it's a handgun, it's a pistol. And this is Miami, Hialeah, if you know the area, 1987, at the mall, the Westland Mall there. And they're effecting an arrest. And he's coming, here's a car, he's in the front, and the SWAT team is in the back. And when it comes to approach the guy, he has his gun out like this, right? The bad guy shoots, and he keeps on pulling the trigger. The bullet went inside the barrel right here, through the muzzle right here, and plugs it. So the gun's right here. If it wasn't there, go right in his face or something. He caught the bullet with his gun. The bullet catcher right there, one in a million right there. So he kept on pulling the trigger, and the SWAT team realized what's going on, and he had glass shatter on him and everything else, and they open up in the back and take care of that guy. So I always said, man, that's your birthday right there. Your day, unbelievable, 1 in a million. After he retired years ago. Ripley, believe it or not, did a special on that, him surviving that shooting and taking the bullet. And I remember I was like in high school when that happened, and I remember the local coverage talking about that, surviving that crazy shootout. So very lucky guy. So he became a mentor, friend of mine, and I learned a lot from everybody working. And I developed my own style of working undercover. I didn't look like this. I didn't sound like this. I spoke Spanish. I did a lot of English that broken, no very good. Like I came from Cuba. I've been here 10 years. My hair was very long. I had a big beard. Everything else, make sure I didn't think I was educated. Came from the country, almost like a Tony Montana, Scarface type. I don't know if have you seen that movie? Scarface? Yeah. And so I did that kind, and I was very good dealing with all kinds of people. If there were, whatever ethnicity, whatever race, and also dealing with different kind of cases, gang members, dealing with repeat violent offenders, bought a lot of dope and a lot of guns from a lot of bad people, and put a lot of people away for a long time, which is good, which I found fascinating. One case in particular, and I just wrote an article about it on Medium called Evil Eyes, and I'll tell you about some undercover stuff. This was a case, I started dabbling undercover work. This is back in like July 2008, before I became really prolific undercover. I have, because ATF is a smaller outfit than FBI, since you mentioned FBI or DEA, we have less than 3,000 agents. So we got to wear many hats, George. We got to be the case agent sometimes, undercover. We do the property on workup and everything else. And we do it all, surveillance. We got to do it all. We can't just task off different projects because we're smaller, and especially want to be ambitious and do bigger cases. You got to multitask. And I developed the skill set of being very good at multitasking and doing a lot of things. And not just your case. You also then got to help other people with their cases. So while you're working your case, someone has another deal, you got to break off and help them cover their deal. So it's always something, very busy work. So, and sometimes you're easily spending 10, 12-hour days and stuff like that. Because especially on the weekends, if you want to be successful in doing undercover, you always have your undercover phone with you. These guys are always calling you. You either got informants, which I have quite a bit. They're calling you all the time. So you got to be a good handler also on top of that. And a good informant is golden, can help you go anywhere. They vouch for you, which makes it a lot easier for you. So a good informant that's doing it right, vouches for you, it's easier for you to do that. Because that's what I like to do. I like to have the informants introduce me. I do my buys and then cut them out, because informants can also hurt you. Because unfortunately, while a lot of them a lot of them have a history of being criminals, and sometimes they go back to their old ways of using drugs, and they can compromise your case. You cut them out. If I need to bring you back for any reason, I bring you back to say, hey, listen, what does this guy really think about me? What's going on? And get some more intelligence. So that's how you have to be good at multitasking, working with informants and everything. So if you get a call on Sunday night and you rather watch a football game, the guy can know something up. But you take a call from one of your targets, you record it, and you talk to the guy for an hour on the phone. He said, no way, this guy's a Fed or in law enforcement. Well, he's talked to me for an hour on a Sunday night, right? They're going to say, no, this guy's the real deal. So you have to be good about this and do that all the time. So this one case in particular, I dubbed the article, you can read it in Medium, and it's called Medium, which is a huge, like I said, online publishing, Medium, Medium. I think they have over 100 million users, which is pretty impressive. Anybody can write on it. You can put your stories out there, which I've done that. And like I said, all my books are on Amazon, so you can see those too. And if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, all my books are free for you. So if you're a K subscriber, 80 books of mine you can read for free, from everything from true crime and everything else, what's going on. So this guy from Evil Eyes, we get a call, and being a duty agent means you get calls from, let's say, from the police or concerned citizen about information. They'll pass it on to you either through headquarters or through a division office to say, okay, who's the duty this week? Okay, it's Ignacio. We're going to pass him these kind of calls are going on. So one of the locals had called me. It's, I think, in the afternoon in July, and they said, hey, listen, we found in a storage unit, it was like lots of guns and explosives and ammunition here. We had a good call from the manager. So I said, okay, let me head out there, and it's near the airport. And when I get out there, I'm not gonna mention the guy's name, but he was a white male, about 30s, I would say maybe early 30s, a little overweight. And we started talking, and he gave us consent. He was actually living in the storage unit, which these are all red flags you pick up. And this is what my assessments of what happened here later is going to be what we stopped, what I think. This is my opinion. Because everything, you look at Timothy McVeigh, you look at domestic terrorism, you look at mass shootings, you look at the pattern of these guys being loners, guys who are not happy what's going on, and then you have a top of a lot of weapons and explosives and everything else. It was a scary situation, very scary. So I talked to him, he gave us consent, and he's, well, pretty much the manager had opened the unit because he saw water coming out of the unit, right? Water. And when he opens it, he realized you can't be living in these storage units, and you can't have firearms and ammunition. And when he opens it up, he noticed that he had a shower set up, was leaking water. He had a bed set up in there. He had a huge tank with these monster snakes in there. I mean, like monster pythons in the snake tank, right? That were like shocking. And then he saw all the guns and ammunition and possible explosives, grenades. He freaks out. He calls the local police. They come out there, and they bring the bomb squad and everything else. And I get a call. I'm out here. So we started looking at him, and we noticed that we had consent from him. We searched and we found that he had modified his AK-47s to fully automatic, right? Which is a big no-no. You can't be doing that. He had grenades in there. He had over a pound of smokeless powder, right? He had countless rounds in there. I think over 4,000 or 5,000 rounds of a variety of AK-47, 7.62 by 39, and other types for his handguns. He had a huge collection of weapons. He's also uses a lot. He smoked a lot of weed also, so he couldn't have these weapons. He's a drug user, right? He was involved in all this stuff. And then what I found curious was he had all these books. And you ever heard of the anarchist cookbooks? How to like overthrow the government and stuff like that? He had,
yeah, they're the I just want to provide some context. That's all. So the anarchist cookbook is basically a manual for terrorism, and it's just a list of recipes for people to make bombs and like all these other things that could be used for rebellion, but it's been linked to a lot of real world terrorist attacks. Funny enough, the author of it actually became a Christian. Like he became like a hardcore Christian and like wanted to get the book off the shelves. I don't know who sells it now, and I don't know who would want to, but
this is 2008. So you know that this is 2008. So maybe he wasn't a Christian then, but it was, and it's so different varieties too, because he had different ones. You know, how to make booby traps. Anarchists, how to make booby traps. Anarchists, how to do explosive devices. Anarchists, how to overthrow a government. He had one which I thought was like shocking. How to do different mixture of explosives. How to do that. I mean, he had books and books that were just like shocking was involved. And then you're looking at the big picture what's going on here. And then he also had a Chevy Astro van. He had consent to look in that. And what I would find here, I thought was like an abduction kit. I have to be honest with you. He had a big green bag full of leg irons, handcuffs. He had a like a not a taser, but a device to like shock someone, right? He also had like masks, like Halloween scary masks he put over his face, hoodies, big glasses, and covering everything you would think a serial killer or someone's to kidnap somebody would have. Get him, and the van opens sideways perfectly. You know the ones you roll over, they open sideways like this. You roll out and you grab the person on both sides. So very, very scary van that he had set up, and what he had set up in there also. And he also had a lot of firearms in there too. All dangerous. You know where he worked at? He worked at a local gun shop, a federal firearms licensee. So he was very well familiar with gun laws, staying local, and he knew what he was doing was illegal. He knew he had these guns that he modified to make them fully automatic were illegal what he did. So, but he fell on the sword very quickly on the gun charges. There was also silencers and everything else. He fell apart that he messed up. He made all excuses why he did it. He knew it was wrong. He did it, but he fell on the sword on that. But he really won't talk much about everything else, which I found to be interesting. So he gets sentenced to about 2 years federally for possession of unregistered machine guns, right? And then when he gets out, like my suspicion was, less than a year later, he commits a bank robbery. The guy's a bank robber, and those are serious events. He goes in there and with a note, and he robs up there, and this is north of Tampa. I think it was near Brooksville in Hernando County, and he robs a bank up there. I think Bank of America, if I'm not mistaken, and he takes about 17,000. Now that same night, he's in that same Astro van, right, that he had, and I think he falls asleep, and the police find him there based on the description, everything else, and arrest him with a lot of the money that was there, everything else, and he ends up getting. I think the judge sent him because he makes excuses. Said, "Listen, there's no real victim here." I think based on the report I read, the banks are insured, right? He was saying, so there's no real victim here. He says, "What kind of excuses are this you're making?" The judge was very upset with him, and he got 15 years. They gave him the max, 15 years for bank robbery and stuff. And the teller also said she suffered a lot of PTSD with the event. It was very dramatic for her that she suffered a lot, which is true. All these tellers, when you get someone a note and you're threatening them that whatever he put in there, that maybe there's a bomb or I have a gun, I'm going to shoot you. That's very traumatic for the victim, obviously. So he got 15 years for what he did. But I always thought, looking back, that we had stopped a mass shooter, right, or domestic terrorist, because he was gunned and ready. He was a loner. He felt like he had no real friends, and he was living in a storage unit. And the only big friends he had were these sick, big, pythons, were enormous. They feed the little mice to, right? And he was living in awful conditions, just planning and reading to do bad things. I think we stopped something. I really do.
Hey man, I mean, it's a shame because there's a lot of guys like that, unfortunately, and
Yep.
it's your job to figure them out. So, I remember it was like the lead researcher for school shootings in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he actually noted, interestingly enough, that when it comes to the profile for people that do mass shootings, at least in schools, that the profile for shooters in general, and he's a doctor, by the way, so he's a literal expert. So he said that there's 3 categories, and I asked him, the first question I asked him is there any truth to the stereotypical loner who ends up going out and shooting up a school? And he actually said, interestingly enough, no, that there's really not much truth to it, because there ends up being guys of so many different walks of life that end up going about these terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
Like, he's had guys that were like the head of the football team that go in with a gun and like they have the mission to kill like 2 people. And it's like
mental health is the biggest problem with these people, and that could be a big cycle too. Yeah, loner. Yeah, for him, some of them are, but mental health crisis is why I wrote a book about that and listed a lot of examples of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history and how to stop them happening again. And it seems like the biggest common denominator is mental health crisis, because it's not normal to want to kill people like that, right? In their school, something snaps. You have a depression. You have anxiety. Something makes you snap and triggers you, where you start planning. Say, I'm going to commit House of Horrors with my classmates because of whatever reason happens. Parkland's a perfect example. Look at Nicholas Cruz and what he did and how he was expelled and he got angry. But the signs were out there. People were reporting it. And you know what happened? It was reported to the FBI, and it fell through the cracks with them and with the locals. They had to pay out to the family of the victims millions of dollars for not moving on information that was provided earlier enough to go out there, and that's very sad.
Well, one thing I want to note with that, so you hit it on the head when you said that it's not normal to want to show up at school. And I say that, I mean, that sounds obvious, but I say that because I asked him, I asked Dr. Peter Langman, which is his name. I asked him very directly, has there ever been a circumstance where an everyday healthy, happy person goes and shoots up a school?
No.
His response was, George, I don't want to sound facetious, but normal, healthy, happy people don't have the urge to shoot up a school.
No.
They just don't. So, I mean, for some people, like, yeah, that's really obvious, but that's something that does have to be said because,
Of course, yeah.
because people might think or have the idea that, okay, some guy just snaps one day and just pulls out a gun and starts killing people. No, it's usually much more premeditated than that. From what you're saying, it is too. So going forward in your ATF career and all the stuff that you see in all the undercover work you've done, what's the craziest bust you've had to do? Like items that you found where you're like, this is like totally not, like they don't even make sense, or it's just so much of something that you're like,
this
yeah.
guy, Evil Eyes, was one up there because that's insane what he had there. But like case like that in my book, I talk a lot of examples of case I did there. I'll give you an example because ATF specializes in firearms trafficking cases a lot. We do a lot of that, and like I said, you have a good informant that makes a good introduction. You start working your way up the food chain. So I'm going to show you how diverse firearms trafficking is. You can't stereotype. Okay, firearms trafficker looks like this. He's going to be maybe an Hispanic male, to be a black male or a white male, right? You're going to say, I dealt with all different kinds. But with this one particular case, that took me all the way to the top of the food chain. And yep, I see you there. So I start with a case introduction of a dirty FedEx employee, right, out of the Tampa area, who was illegally shipping guns to Puerto Rico. He goes to Puerto Rico. He gets convicted, right? He pleads guilty. While he's waiting sentencing, the informant introduced him to me. So he's a convicted felon, right? He's still going to gun shows. He's still going to flea markets. He's buying guns and selling them to me. And he was selling me like FNs, 5.7 millimeters, what they call the cop killer guns. This guy's a convicted felon. He's got the cop killer gun. He'll sell them to me for good prices. He'll send me a Thompson gun with a 75 round drum. Very good. I'll buy those too from him. So this guy is prohibited. Doesn't matter anything. He's still going everywhere. Nobody cares. Cash and carry, because at the gun shows, nobody does private sales backgrounds, or you buy online from other people. They look for your ID, but they're not doing background checks either. So boom, the guns get shuffled around. I'm buying them. We bust him. Boom. We get this guy down. One of his sources, I start meeting with him. He's a school teacher. He's a high school teacher by day, gun trafficker at night. I get to be very tight with this guy, and he sells me a ton of weapons that he's at the gun show. He'll call me and say, hey, I'm here at the gun show. What are you looking for? I said, they're not his collection. He's buying it for me. He said, oh, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. Okay, I'll look for it for you. He buys them. We meet. He sells them to me. We do that for a while. I take him down. Boom. He goes down. Then I find out who he's dealing with. He's dealing with a dirty federal firearms licensee, a gun owner, a gun shop owner, right? They have a public trust to do the right thing because they're supposed to do things the right way. So when I meet with him, of course, remember how I look, big beard, long hair, my accent, everything going on there. He says, oh, good. I tell him, hey, none of these guns I buy from you are going to stay here. Oh, that's why I like it. I said, I used to sell guns to a lot of Mexicans also. I like when the guns leave the area, they don't come back. He said, I'll let you know how I do this. There'll be no paperwork. I'm a licensed dealer. I order them, but that way ATF can't, I'll cook my books, so to speak. I won't put them in the book, so they won't know what I'm ordering from the wholesaler. I won't put them in my A&D book, and I'm selling it to you. I said, keep on speaking because I have it all recorded. So we do that for a while, and we bust him also. So, and he was shipping a lot of guns to a lot of people all over that end up going to Puerto Rico and going other places too. So, and he's supposed to have the public trust of a license and do the background check and do things right. And he's doing a workaround because he's having also financial. All of these guys had something in common. You know what it was? They were having financial difficulties, and they were trying to make extra money by trafficking in guns. That's a lesson there. So you had an older white guy, federal family, a younger guy who's working at the high school, right? And you have someone else who's a Puerto Rican FedEx worker who's also trafficking guns. Man, you check different boxes, different people, and you don't know how a firearms trafficker looks like. Just someone who needs money, knows guns, and knows how to get access to them.
So, looking at how they actually go about it, how a lot of these firearms traffickers are going about it, because from what you're saying is that they're basically just buying guns and then reselling them unregistered.
That's right. That's right. It's very easy in Florida. Maybe it's a little harder in New Jersey, but in New York area, but in the Southeast Florida, very red states, it's very easy to buy guns. And ghost guns are another big problem too. You know, ghost guns are either 3D printed, which are untraceable, right? Or
Yep.
you have the kits, polymer 80 kits, where before you used to be able to buy these kits at a store, at a gun shop, no background. Here's the cash and carry, and take them out the door. They're supposed to put a serial number now, and it's supposed to do background checks, but I don't know if that's happening or not. But a lot of times there's so many out there from before, and people buy them anyways. And it's also easiest to order the parts and then put together yourself also. So it's a lot of loopholes, man. It's making it harder for ATF to trace these guns if they're untraceable. There's no serial number. We have a big problem. 21st century gun trafficking is a big problem in this country.
So, from what you've seen, right, and everything you've been through, are you yourself for or against gun rights, like in general? Because that's a super hot topic in
Oh,
America.
yeah, no, I'm very pro Second Amendment. Most ATF agents I knew were Republicans, conservatives. They were for good citizens for gun ownership, because you have to be able to protect yourself. You have to be able to defend your family and protect yourself. Because if you think calling 911 when you have home invaders coming in, the police will come and save you, it's not going to happen. You got to be able to have your weapons, learn how to use them, and shoot in practice. Because if you never fired your gun and you're trying to figure out familiar yourself when the guy's coming up the door or coming up the stairs, that's not the time to hope to understand how to shoot your weapon. You need to practice, familiarize yourself how to use it, get a concealed weapons permit also, so when you're out and about, you can have it. Certain places won't let you, but at least have it in your car, you get carjacked or something happens, you can try to defend yourself and your family. But it's important to protect yourself. Bad people? No. Career offenders? No. Repeat violent offenders? No. Gang members? No. Firearms traffickers, arming cartels? No. Murder for hire cases, armed home invaders? Those are the guys who go after.
So,
did I make it clear?
yeah. So, the ATF in general has gotten kind of a bad rap by a lot of people, right? And
wrongly so, though. Wrongly so. And some things wrong, some things, like anything else, people don't like when ATF says, yes, you can have bump stocks, yes, you can have arm brace, pistol braces, and all of a sudden they say, no, you can't, and you pay the money, and then yes, you can, and back and forth. Nobody wants the administration use an agency to try to take something away from you. If it was okay before, keep it legal. Remember, never demonize the object. It's what's between the ears and the person. A weapon doesn't kill you unless it's a bad person, right? A good guy with a gun can always stop a bad guy with a gun. Remember that.
well, if we're talking about because a lot of what the ATF gets bad rap for is what you said. So it's kind of like back and forth with like what they say is what is illegal and what's not, in terms of guns. But also too, there has been events such as like Ruby Ridge, and I think Waco too.
Waco, yeah.
Waco and Ruby Ridge are like the main ones where the ATF gets involved, and then
Remember, Ruby Ridge was the marshals. It was an ATF warrant. The marshals go up there, make their arrests. One marshal gets killed, and they get involved trying to shoot. Now, if you, like I said, if you cooperate with law enforcement, I'm going to say in Waco also, cooperate when they have a warrant and agree and cooperate. Don't open up and try to shoot and kill agents. Remember, 4 agents were murdered in Waco. They were killed. They had a warrant to go in there. David Koresh was a bad guy. He was molesting those children. He had illegal weapons. ATF a search warrant to go in there. And he had information. The agents were coming, and he opened fire on them, knowing they were coming on federal agents. That's wrong. And then at the end, he had a chance to let the children go with negotiations with the FBI for over 50 days. And instead, when they were coming, he said, set the fire. Their listening devices said it. It wasn't FBI that set the fire. He set the fire. He had his own people. He pretty much killed his own people because he was a madman. I know they want to say bad rap, but if you look at the facts, these were bad people. They were bad people, did bad things. And that's what we deal with. And then they try to put the blame on, why didn't you let the children go? Why didn't you let your people go? Why didn't you cooperate? He had a God complex. He felt like he was this and that. And he could only have sex with the women that were brought to him. So if you were in a couple, you couldn't have sex with your wife anymore. Only he could. And he will have sex with younger minors also. He was a sick guy.
Well, what would you say to the people that criticize the ATF as being like an example of a bad federal agency?
I think the opposite. I think it's the opposite. I think look at William Barr. He said ATF, former Attorney General under the Trump administration, that per value, ATF agents, you get more bang for your buck than any other federal agency. We do a lot. We enforce a lot. We go after really bad people. You look under what happened with the George Floyd riots, right? In Minneapolis in 2020, right? I was still in ATF, I was headquarters, and where the governor, his name is Tim Walz, who's now going to be the VP nominee for Kamala Harris, right? He spent 3-4 days, didn't call the National Guard after the mayor, and the police chief said, we need help. We're getting overrun. We can't stop this. They're burning down the city. They burned down Minneapolis. They lost a precinct. They lost businesses. He spent 3-4 days not doing anything. A lot of people think because the wokeism in there, they felt bad for Floyd. 2 wrongs don't make a right. What happened there, they should have stopped it immediately. Federal agents were out there. We went out there because we went out there doing cases, and a lot of guys using Molotov cocktails on unregistered destructive devices, arsonists. All those cases were done by ATF, throwing those people away later who committed those atrocities, which should never have happened. The governor, which I don't think he's fit to be the vice president, it was Harris, made the wrong decision. To me, he's a modern day Nero. He let his city burn and watch it burn.
What do you think? So this is going back a little bit to a few of our earlier topics. So when it comes to the corruption that you've seen in the ATF, was there ever circumstances of people getting busted by internal affairs?
No, yeah, for sure. There's no perfect agency. Unfortunately, everybody does stupid things, and sometimes you get involved in some of these task force, you guys get cut up in narcotics groups where they're maybe doing stupid shit, ripping stuff off, stealing, selling drugs. Yeah, we had unfortunate agents get arrested all the time. Like I said, you've got to have that good moral compass and said, this is not something I'm going to involved in. This is going to involve, you get out of that, right? You talk to your supervisor and you get out of that situation. It's not worth your freedom. It's not worth your reputation. It ends your career. That's you'll be branded a convicted felon, a drug trafficker, or worse, whatever you committed, a home invader, maybe you're ripping off stash houses, maybe you're ripping off drug dealers. Miami, there was a lot of that going on, and a lot of corruption, people stealing, killing. They had the river cops. You had a lot of stuff going on. When you see that kind of amount of money, that kind of cocaine, that kind of or drug money, where you think, okay, the drug dealer is not going to report this if I steal it, or I'm going to do this to him. But you know what? It comes back to you. It comes back to you. And it's not worth that kind of life. But yeah, ATF has it. Everyone, DEA, FBI, marshals, you name it, Secret Service, you've seen corruption on all levels, state, federal, local. You got to just have. But like I said, they're the exception. They're the 1%ers that give the law enforcement tainted badges a bad reputation.
So when you were also doing the drug busts in customs, right? I was going to ask this before, but what was the craziest thing you've ever seen somebody trying to smuggle?
Well, I think the mules, that was something I talked about there. I've seen a lot of sad, when they use their kids, I think, right, to come in and they put the cocaine in their shoes, right, in the soles, and they get busted. And it's sad to see their family separated. They're going away. The kids are going to have to go to some sort of foster care or something, right? And it's really sad when you see people so desperate. They think it's okay to try and make some extra money. It's never worth the risks, never worth the headaches. I thought it was crazy also to see people putting a lot of cocaine. We have major 747s, huge airplanes loaded with flowers. They're trying to put the drugs inside the stems of the flowers. That's hard to detect. I have to be honest with you. You can't really pick it up on X-rays. It's hard to detect. Canine, you need intelligence. That's scary because that's really hard to detect. Sometimes in the huge groupers come in, we used to get 600-700 pounds of cocaine. They would have the big grouper with a block of ice next to a block of kilo, and that would get ripped off also. So you name any way they bring it in bricks. It's just any way you can think about it, they'll bring it in. Here's another creative way. Was I did a nice seizure of a cocaine in alcohol. So when you shake the bottle, it comes out all puffy. You have to drain it and get the coke out. So they would have like cases of it was from Haiti, Babankou, that would have cocaine inside, liquid cocaine. So it comes in all different ways, man.
What do you think you've learned from, like, what if there's one thing that you would nail down that you've learned in your career in law enforcement? What would it be? Like one thing that you learned mostly.
You got to have good common sense, right? You've got to. It's important to be a good worker, have good common sense. You know what's right from wrong. But one thing you learn is be humble, because in law enforcement, the street will teach you a lot of things. You can have a degree, right? You can have your master's, you can have whatever you have, but the street's a different world and there's a different culture. Be humble, keep your eyes open, learn, don't get yourself in trouble, but work your way up, because it's making case and investigations. There's a lot of things thrown at you. You got to learn it quickly, but you got to do it right so you can make the right cases. Because then you get that reputation. It's hard because at federal level, you got to develop those good reputation to work with the prosecutor. If not, they won't take your cases either. So it's really different than the state. A state, you arrest somebody, they have to take it. Federally, it doesn't always work that way. So there's a lot of factors you got to work with. So that's also frustrating, because sometimes you had really good cases, but bad prosecutors that can really sink your case, or you had a bad judge who's an activist judge, or you had a bad jury. I mean, there's so many factors people don't realize working cases that can have an impact on how your case goes. And also bad supervisors too. I've had good supervisors and had really bad supervisors. So it's just a lot of things. That's why I read my book, ATF Undercover. It's not just about, war stories, making cases. It's also my life. It also talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly of ATF. And I talked about some of the problems we also had with ATF too.
So what do you think if you were the president, let's say, right? Or if you were the king of the United States and you can make one decision, right?
An executive order, huh? What executive order would I sign?
Yeah, what would it be? What would you change first day?
Well, I mean, we have so many laws, and what I've learned is you can sign all the paper you want, but drugs are illegal, right? But they're everywhere, right? We have all the gun laws, but people, doesn't matter. They still get around everything. So you can sign anything you want. Doesn't mean anything's going to change. So it has to come from within. People have to. What I think what we have is an epidemic with people with addiction. Yeah, if you're a violent drug trafficker, armed, you need to do time and go away. But if you're a person who has an addiction issue, we now get people, get them the help they need to get off that, because that's what you need. If people stop using drugs, the cartels are the drug business, right? But that's it. No one's buying it. They're done. So these are things we have to work in, is helping people get off their addictions, getting their lives straight, so they're not using these products that ruins their lives, ruins their families' lives. It's awful. You go to YouTube and you watch all these people who have drugs destroy their lives, right? The massive addiction. We need to get them the help they need, get them off it, get people educated not to use it. I think if you come from a good home, and I always had a good example, right? My family never even smoked. So I never really smoked. Occasionally, maybe I smoke a cigar here and there. Never drank. So, I drink occasionally. You have a good example of home. I think that's a big help in life. You have to start early. If you don't have that, it could be a big mess later. So I'd say you have to have people, because you can pass everything you want. I don't think it makes a difference. It has to come from what people do from inside. Just remember, we have 340 million Americans, right? Living here, maybe more with illegals or whatever the number we have in this country here. So you can pass all the laws you want, and then enforcing it's something else, because a lot of times we only get 1 or 2% of the people committing these heinous crimes. So they feel they can do more and more and more and awful things. That's a problem when you have such corruption in Mexico, right? We don't have a fair partner in the war on drugs. We have such massive corruption in Mexico and Latin America, and they're coming in. You look at Nicolas Maduro. Talk a little politics here with Venezuela still in the election once again. So it's awful what's going on. It's hard to win, and they're weaponizing cocaine, weaponizing heroin, and fentanyl against the United States, Canada, and the world, knowing that they try and destroy America from within like a rotten apple to collapse.
Do you have any advice for young people?
Yeah, stay away from drugs. Stay away. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. I mean, some kids may smoke. I know pot now is getting very legal, right, recreationally, and I'm not sure in New Jersey. I know in Virginia is legal for recreational and also medical. Florida was medical, try to make it recreational. I don't know what's New Jersey.
I think well, I know it's decriminalized. So it's I think it's recreational because I remember because I know there's like a steakhouse like not too long away from my house, and right by there's a very active marijuana dispensary. So people go there all the time. So I don't assume every single one of them is going for medical reasons. That's for sure. So
Yeah, so try to keep away from the drugs. I mean, it's one thing people smoke some dope, but that could lead other things. And even if people smoke a lot of weed, it's never my thing. I was asthmatic growing up. I grew out of it with time because I started running, swimming a lot. Get involved in positive things because what I've noticed people who do smoke a lot is that they don't seem as energetic, motivated to do things, and that can be a hamper later in your life. I say keep away from the drugs, stay healthy, and stick to friends which are good examples. And even if you only have 2 or 3 good friends, it's better to have 2 or 3 good friends than have a lot of people really not your friend, and at the end will backstab you and hurt you. So stick close to your good friends. That's the best. That's I've done in my life, and that's the best advice I can give you.
All right. Well, it was good having you on. I'm going to stop the recording. We'll talk after the show. What did you think so far, though? Or what do you have to say to the audience before I stop recording?
No, like I said, it's a great show George is doing. I think it's a good example for you guys. I admire and appreciate the young people getting involved and having a voice, influencing and speaking to us and listening to us and having their say also. So, George, congratulations. Keep it up, man. All success to you.
Thank you. All right. In 3, 2, 1.